Okay, well, hi everyone. Welcome to the California Coastal Resilience Network webinar series. My name is Jessica Madden, and I am the facilitator for the Coastal Resilience Network, as well as a Sea Grant State Fellow for the State Coastal Conservancy. The California Coastal Resilience Network promotes knowledge exchange through webinars on climate-induced impacts on human communities and coastal habitats. We will provide a link to the network if you'd like to join or watch past webinars, including today's, on our website. This link can be found in the follow-up email that you'll receive after today's webinar. So we have two exciting presentations lined up for today. We will listen and watch to each presentation for about 20 minutes, and each will follow with a Q&A session. During the presentations, please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand side of the Zoom screen. And this webinar is being recorded and will be available for review after the webinar. So today's presentations will discuss the use of cell phone data to better understand patterns of coastal visitation and access. Our first presentation will be from Sam Velaz and Leo Salas from Point Blue. Thanks for joining us today, Sam and Leo. Take it away. Looks like you're muted, Sam.
I tried to hit unmute. How's that? Can you enter? You seeing the correct screen?
Looks great.
Okay, great. Yes, thanks everybody, and excited to be here this morning to give this presentation. Leo and I are gonna give a presentation of work we conducted as part of a project that Marin County Community Development Agency got funding from the Ocean Protection Council through Proposition 68. And that is their Stinson Beach Adaptation Resilience Collaboration Project. And this project was essentially just a piece of that grander project. And the funding was to help the county develop an adaptation plan and strategy for sea level rise. And as a piece of that, the county was really interested in trying to engage with all as diverse and equitable representation of community members who use the Stinson Beach resources as possible. And the traditional ways that folks do this by going out and collecting surveys, in any one point in time, it just, everybody kind of acknowledges that that's just sort of a snapshot and isn't really a great representation potentially of everyone using the beach. And so we proposed this idea of, can we use the location information coming from people's cell phones to get a better understanding of who's using the beach, in particular, what disadvantaged communities are using the beach. And so that sort of gives you a general overview of the project. And I also want to mention that Maya Hayden, former Point Blue employee, now with USGS, was also a member of this team and contributed heavily to the project. Okay, so we'd had these particular study questions that we were focused on the project, and this is what we'll sort of focus in on today with our what we found. Specifically, as I mentioned, we're interested in, are there particular disadvantaged communities that beach users tend to come from? And the county's, like I said, interested if we can identify those, then they could direct their outreach efforts towards those communities. We're also just interested in whether we could document from the data use patterns of, when people are coming to the beach. So for example, time of day, seasons, in particular, where there was greater or less usage. And then finally, we wanted to ask some questions that sort of get at, how beach use might change in the future. And so we wanted to understand, does use correlate with extreme weather conditions, for example, heat waves? And if so, are there differences in use during these events between disadvantaged communities and other communities? So those were like I said, the main focus questions that we were going through. Now I'm going to turn it over to Leo, and he's going to go through the next set of slides.
Thank you, Sam. So the first thing is that we're going to get this cell phone data, and it needs to be anonymized. The company we work with to provide the data, AirSage, took care of it. They did that by aggregating the data in space and time. So the time aggregation is basically that they give us daily count, and it's actually split by hour. And then but it's really a daily count upon. I'll explain that in a second. And the spatial aggregation is that they did it by census blocks, block groups. I'm sorry, which is aggregation of blocks. In doing so, all you know is that there's this cell phone from. Sorry, I hear that feedback. It's I'm in a let me see if I can walk out of here. Is that I was telling Jessica that as we were going to start today, the internet went off in my office. Is it better now?
That's actually a little better. Thanks, Leo.
Okay, let's do this. Anyway, going back to this, so the spatial aggregation was by the census group, and then they broke it by hours, ethnicity, age, gender, income, etc. And they have certain categories of that. I'm going to show you that in a second. Next slide, Sam. So, for example, there is an home block group here that's 060011, etc. And they give us a date for the data. They say this home block group is from Alameda County, and there were 58 people coming from that county that day. And then they tell us on which hours were those phones present there. And you see, I purposely put there 58 and 58 and at 4 and 5 p.m. because it shows you that it is indeed not that is a unique number of cell phones at 4 p.m. and the unique number of cell phones at 5 p.m. But it's just that of those 58, turns out 100% of them were on those 2 hours at Stinson Beach. Okay, and then they take that count at 58. And because they know it comes from that home block group, they know the percent of whites, Latinos, Asians in that census block or block group, and then they apply the percentage to 58, and that's the data we get. So nothing special there, but knowing this data, the way they presented it to us, we know that we cannot sum going to the right on the table. We can only sum going down. So it's okay to sum the counts on a daily basis. It's also okay to sum the counts on an hourly basis. That's okay. But it's not okay to sum across hours. And if we sum across, the categories ethnicity or age or whatever, they all add up to 100% of the counts, which is 58 in this example. Okay, I hope that's clear. Next slide, Sam, please. So we go back to the first question. Where are those beach users coming from? And they had about 3 million daily visitors over the past 5 years, which is amazing. And they came from most every county in California, but predominantly from Marine and the Bay Area. You can see that the orange and the dark blue. About 1/3 from Marine, and 1/3 from other Bay Area counties, and 1/3 from the rest of the state. But they had visitors from pretty much everywhere in the U.S., the other 49 states. Next slide. Still staying in that question, where they're coming from, as we said, mainly locals, but if you remove Marin County, you will see an interesting pattern. Right? The first, you see San Francisco, Contra Costa, and Alameda, which are very close to Marin County. But then it's Sacramento, ahead of Sonoma. And that may be because the Sonoma people we have our own beaches here. We don't need to go to Marine to get into a beach or Marine. That might be the case. I remember that one interest they had is whether there was an impediment in access to the beach. We don't think that that's the case here. And then we continue on this list, and we have Solano, San Mateo, Santa Clara, Placer County before Napa. And in particular, Placer County, which is up, in the mountains before Napa. Well, one thing to keep in mind here is a density effect, population density effect. The numbers we're using here, the number of visitors, not the percent of inhabitants in the block group or the county, right? And Napa is not as populated as San Mateo, Santa Clara, for example. Next. And how is it being used? Well, obviously, weekends, no surprise there. And you can see too that, of course, is in the hottest part of the day when we have the most people present there, which is between, I don't know, noon and 4 p.m., noon and 5, is when the majority of people are at the beach. Next slide, Sam. And of course, in the hottest part of the year during the summer, right? It's of course a little bit of use in the spring and the fall, but mostly in the summer, more than twice. That's once. Thank you. Next slide. And then going back to the demographics, with the data from the block group census data, and we see that 62% of visitors are whites, and then the rest is the other ethnicities combined. In California, the ratio here is more like 50 and 50, or 40 and 60, somewhere in there. I checked that. So you would say, well, maybe it's that these minorities are not using in proportion to their presence in the state, but there are other factors to need to be taken into account to draw that conclusion. It's not that simple. And you can see also how it splits in by counties here, and you can see that Hispanics are mostly the visitors coming to the beach from Marin County, which is interesting, right? Same with Contra Costa. I think next slide, Sam. I think that's for you. Take it from here.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Leo. So we did, as you remember, one of the important questions we were asking is which disadvantaged communities are folks coming from? And we certainly learned through this project that there is not one way that anyone is, or that even state agencies are using to define what is a disadvantaged community. So as part of the project, we decided to turn to the Cal EnviroScreen 4.0 data to help us understand. And the Cal EnviroScreen index is made up of a set of a bunch of different variables that are then aggregated to come up with sort of one index, and then you can sort of use that index to classify, what percentile you're in. So the top percentiles are the most disadvantaged. For our project, we decided to focus on this set of 5 of the variables that are in the Cal EnviroScreen. So educational attainment, housing burdened, low-income households, linguistic isolation, poverty, and unemployment. And each of those variables has its own map that covers the entire state, where census tracts get a score for each of the variables. So a higher score means you're in sort of that more disadvantaged category. And so then what we did is we combined the 5 maps representing these variables together, took an average of each of those scores, and then we classified it by saying if you were in the highest upper 30th percentile, we considered that a disadvantaged community. And then the lower 70% of tracts were non-disadvantaged communities. And so this is done at the statewide level, so it puts it in perspective of all the data from the state. Now, like I said, there's not one way to do this. This is just what we did for this project. It was a way that we could describe and sort of using established methods. We didn't want to come up with something entirely new. But that, there could be other ways to do this. So how is the beach being used by disadvantaged Bay Area communities? So this is just focusing in the Bay Area. There's, for example, in Marin County, there just aren't that many disadvantaged communities, for example. And so most of the use is coming from those non-disadvantaged communities. We did think it was pretty interesting, as Leo pointed out, there is quite a bit of use coming from Sacramento. And of that, there is kind of a big chunk coming from disadvantaged communities in that Sacramento area. So you can see sort of on the left, the darker blues are the bars. So the numbers coming from those disadvantaged communities. And overall, the percentage, as you can see, is 3.6% of the visitation from Bay Area is coming from Bay Area disadvantaged communities, including Sacramento in that analysis. So the greater Bay Area, I suppose. Just to focus in, this study was done for Marin County, so we did want to focus in on Marin, and you can see that the red outline is the disadvantaged community in Marin, and it's right sort of there, right where the Richmond Bridge kind of comes in, and it's sort of in that low to moderate blue category, meaning there's not a lot. The visitation isn't largely coming from that census tract, but we can use this to kind of get a sense for how many people are coming from that area, et cetera. We did not intend for this study. We had, of course, no idea that COVID was going to happen when we started this study, but it gave us a unique opportunity to sort of see how use patterns were affected by this global pandemic. And so quickly, what these graphs show is every dot represents the daily use, the number of people from each of the census block groups in the data set. So every dot is data from a block group, and the x-axis, the horizontal, is the days since the start of our data set. So the data we collected started in January 1st, 2017. So it's sort of, as you move here, it's as you move away from, go from January 1st, 2017 out towards 2021. What the vertical bars show, the red vertical bar is when shelter in place was instituted in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And then these other colored bars are a data analysis we did showing where when in the data there was a change in the slope of the blue line you see there, which is sort of a moving average slope. And so as you can see, right around the time that the shelter in place went into place, we started to see an increase in beach use that sort of peaked right around the winter of 2021. So it appears that people were responding to the pandemic. We were closed up inside, and we were looking for open spaces to get to. And so to me, it really points to the value of these having that open space for communities in general. And you can see that this pattern did replicate across many of the different counties in the greater Bay Area. So it was kind of an interesting opportunistic thing we were able to take advantage of. We were really interested, we did want to do some statistics to just really understand from all these things we were looking at. So remember, we wanted to ask that question, is there any effect of extreme heat days and COVID-19 on beach visitation? Many of the things you see in this table are things we just wanted to, we knew that things like month, day of the week are going to affect visitation, county, like you just saw. So a lot of these things we're including in here are just to sort of control for that variation we know about. And then we wanted to sort of focus in on some more of these things. So you'll notice there are a number of significant factors here. Like I said, these were mainly things we were trying to control for, but then we did see this effect of COVID-19 causing an increase in use. Similarly, we did see an effect of extreme heat. There was not a significant effect, a difference between the use from disadvantaged communities and non-disadvantaged communities, although it was sort of getting close. We did also find an interaction between the extreme heat days by month, which isn't too surprising, as you might expect it to have more of an effect in the summer when people are really trying to escape an extreme heat day in the summer versus extreme heat days in other parts of the year. People might want to go to the beach. And then finally, there was a interaction between COVID-19 response and whether you're a disadvantaged community or not. And I'll show that data here in a second. So that question of did use increase following the COVID-19 pandemic? And yes, it did. And this difference was significant. So use did jump up following the pandemic. We just wanted to show this interaction. So on the right is the before and after in a disadvantaged community. On the left is the before and after for non-disadvantaged communities. And I drew in this green bar to show you kind of the vertical distance between those means. So that's the difference in use for disadvantaged communities. In comparison, we can look at the bar for the non-disadvantaged communities. And what you see is that when I put those kind of together there, interesting. So there was a greater increase for the non-disadvantaged communities, but also interesting to me was that the non-disadvantaged communities actually had a greater proportional use before the pandemic, and it did increase, but it didn't increase quite so much. And we can't really understand why we see these patterns from the data, but I think it could really lead to some interesting questions for folks to follow up and follow up surveys. Why are we seeing these patterns, and what does it mean for the value of this beach resource to both disadvantaged communities and non-disadvantaged communities? So just finishing up here, and we'll turn over. Visitors are coming from all over the state and county, but not surprisingly, most people are coming from the Bay Area. It's a local destination. It's a very important recreational resource for communities outside the Bay Area as well, though. So that, like we pointed out, interesting that folks are coming from Sacramento and Placer counties. The use by disadvantaged communities is mainly from outside Marin County, and that's an interesting result for the county, as the whole point of this was to so that they could do outreach to disadvantaged communities, and that's telling them that they actually need to go beyond the county if they really want to get a sample of those communities that are using the beach. And then as we showed there at the end, that Stinson Beach is a valuable community resource that shows increased use during the COVID-19 pandemic and during heat waves. So, we probably may not have thought about this before COVID-19, but it just shows, what a valuable resources it can be when we're going through these extreme events. So with that, I think hopefully we didn't take too much time, and if we have time for questions, otherwise we can turn it over to the other team.
Great. Thank you so much, Sam and Leo. It looks like we do have a question in the Q&A. How were you able to get ethnicity and demographic data based on the cell phone numbers? So I think maybe you could just go over again how you got that demographic data from the census block phone numbers.
Yeah, I can go back. Sam, you want to show that slide again? It's not from the census numbers. It's from it's not from the cell phone numbers. It's from the census data and the count of cell phones. So if the census data says for a block that there is, say, 42% whites in that census block, then it's 42% of 58 people. That's it. There's no, this is a source of error or imprecision in the data. I will totally agree on that. But that is the data we got. That's how they provide that information. That's how we are interpreting the information as well. So it's an attribution to the home block group, not to each individual cell phone. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that covers the question. Thank you, Leo. We have a follow-up sort of question. Did you do any ground truthing of the assumption that the ethnicity percentages of the census block was the same as the ethnicity percentages of the beach users? In other words, that people of different ethnicities in the same census block use the beach at the same rate?
Yeah, no, we definitely did not do that as part of our piece of the project. I think the intent from the county was they were going to do some surveys to try to use as a ground truthing, but no, we didn't do that. We just kind of, as Leo said, we're assuming this percentage. It's a known, we know that there's probably error there, and it's just, sort of the error that we have to understand that in the assumption that we're using the data in this approach.
Great, thanks, Sam. We have two that are sort of similar to each other, so I'll just say them as one question. How much does it cost to buy cell phone data like you used for this research question?
I honestly forget exactly how much it costs. There are a number of companies, we were just chatting about this before the start of the presentation, and maybe the other team might get into this a little bit, but there are numerous companies that provide this type of data. And if you're interested, I would encourage you to reach out to each of them and see what they provide, and if it suits your need. The reason it may not be all that helpful to say how much we paid is Mark was just pointing out before this call, that they're changing the pricing model, and that what we were able to do was buy the data and download it, and sort of we had the data we have the data now in perpetuity for that 5-year block. Going forward, though, they're more turning to a subscription service where you have access to the data while you continue to pay the subscription. But then I think well, maybe their team can explain, but the point is they're changing their pricing model. So I guess we, as Leo said, we worked with AirSage, but there are various companies out there that provide this service.
Great, thank you. One last question right now, and if anyone else has questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and I'll ask them to our presenters. But our next question is, why were block groups chosen? So I think, why were the census blocks chosen as your metric?
And that's just the way the data is provided. As Leo said, that's the way the company anonymizes it. So we never see the actual individual Point Blue, who contracted with this company, never sees the actual raw cell phone data. We just get an aggregation at that census block group. And that's the way this company does it. And you'd have to check and see how other companies approach that. So we didn't make that choice. It was sort of like we just had to deal with it.
And that's sort of to anonymize the data as well, right? Because if you gave cell phone number data, that level of detail might be infringing on some privacy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I just have one more question. I thought it was super interesting to see the data before and after the COVID pandemic, and how that kind of modified patterns of recreational use, especially by disadvantaged communities. And so I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit more on the impact of that data and what some of the follow-up questions you have would be, because I think that could be a really useful type of information for coastal managers to use when informing like how to design their amenities for coastal areas, especially in this, pandemic world we live in now.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to hit the stop share, but that's okay. I'm not a social scientist. And so I'm a little speculating. This is getting out of my field a bit, but one thing I think about is if it's true, the result we saw, if it's true that beach use increased more for non-disadvantaged communities than disadvantaged communities, I would ask why. Why is that? Is it sort of like if disadvantaged communities have fewer resources, maybe they were unable to take advantage of, maybe access really is somewhat of a constraint, or maybe they were disproportionately in job classes that were sort of exempt from, the shelter in place, right? And so maybe there was just less opportunity. I don't, it's really just speculation, but I think you could look at this data and maybe start to come up with some hypotheses that you could explore in that field. And I'm sure there's like many different things.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
One more question, and I think we'll move to our next presentations. But next question is, how did you choose the 5 socioeconomic indicators?
Yeah, it was a little bit in consultation with Marin County and what they really thought would be useful. For example, they felt that there are factors that, for example, sort of exposure to pollution could have been something, and they sort of felt like, that's not a huge issue in Marin County, so that wasn't something they wanted to focus on. But these were not arbitrary, but they were just decisions we made, and anyone could choose to do it a different way, and because of those choices, the results could change, because different communities, then different block groups could be identified as disadvantaged or not, depending on those choices.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks for all the questions. At this time, I think we can move on to our next presenters. We will have some time at the end of the webinar for everyone to participate in a Q&A all together. So if you had more questions for Leo and Sam, please hold on to them. But yeah, next we have members of the Coastal Access Data Research Working Group here to present on their work in Southern California. So I'll let you introduce yourselves, but the floor is yours.
So can you hear me, Jessica?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. And thanks again for the opportunity to present. My name is Mark Baylor, and I'm with Beacon in Ventura and Santa Barbara County. And I just want to make a note that it's interesting that we're going to follow Sam and Leo, because we actually worked with Sam and Leo as they were one of the first to investigate the use of cell phone data. And we're not another group, we're just a bigger, larger group. And we've collaborated with Sam and Leo and the team there, and we want to continue to do that because no one group brings the entire expertise that's needed to do this kind of work. So Mario, let me just go to the next slide. So today I wanted to introduce who's going to present, but I wanted to let you all know that Dr. Patch from Cal State University, Channel Islands is not going to present today. As you all may know, Cal State University Faculty Association are on strike starting today, and Dr. Patch is withholding her services as a member of the Faculty Association there at Channel Islands. But we've been working very closely with Kiki as part of our team, and with Dr. Merrill at US EPA. So we'll be able to cover the points that the Cal State scientists are working with us on. But I want to note that we are a collaborative of managers and scientists and technical personnel, because we are working in this space in order to better understand how this information can be decision support for, as we talked about already, a better understanding who it is that uses the beach and what do we all desire in the use of the beach. So I'm going to start, and then we're going to have Nate Merrill give us some of the background on the science he has been developing, because the US EPA Office of Research and Development, again, another early pioneer in the use of this information. And then Beacon has contracts with Cal State University for technical services. And so we've relied on their scientists to actually be part of this team and do some of the data processing from the data and the cell phone into our GIS visualization tools. And then finally, because it is all of interest to how this will affect management and stewardship of our beach resources, today Mario Sandoval of MRCA, the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority, will present on some findings, some preliminary findings, and how it would affect actual management of our beach resources. Mario, next slide, please. So we're going to cover many of the topics that Sam and Leo covered, because these are common issues with regard to data sources, data methods, and data analysis. We wanted to know if there were new sources of data that could complement more traditional sources of beach use data. And Sam already mentioned that beach count data is incomplete. It's historically outdated. It's expensive to actually undertake. The last time Beacon itself, and we've been involved in beach count and beach intercept data for some time, we did 13 beaches in 2012. We collected hundreds of intercept surveys, but it's a tiny fraction of the beach use community we well know. So we were looking for sources of information that could augment and actually inform our analysis of beach use. In addition, as I mentioned, we organized a small W, small G working group of just collaborative scientists and managers and funders. And we consulted with Point Blue as they were undertaking and completing their analysis, so that we could actually improve and or try other ways in which to do our work. And one thing that we'll talk about today is the methods we've employed, somewhat similar and somewhat different from Point Blue. And then we have a case study examples, and we're going forward with our work. So we want to describe some of our next steps. Mario, next slide, please. Thank you. So you already heard this, that the cell phone location derived records are matched with census data from the origin census block groups to understand the many publics that use the beach And again, how do underserved and under-resourced communities use our coastal access sites? We wanted to confirm the utility of this data and using the work of EPA and Point Blue and our own work. And then we want to try some new ways to visualize the data. And so we're sharing sources, methods, we're sharing products, we're sharing results, and we're trying to advance the state of the art and the state of the practice in order that we can more robustly, not with preconceived notions, but with real data, understand who uses the beach. And in our case, in Southern California, as a pilot project. Mario, next slide, please. So you can see we have a broad group of potential partners, including Point Blue. We have managers that manage lots of coastal access ways and public access ways, MRCA, LA County Beaches and Harbors. And this isn't a fixed group. This is an evolving collaborative. And I say it's a very informal working group, but it's powerful that we have multiple agencies and multiple skill sets that bring together these this information, which is a very complex set of data. Next step, Mario, next slide, thanks. So I'm repeating some things that Sam already mentioned to you, but we want to know, where do beach visitors come from? How they use the beach, and where do they go to the beach? And then again, our events push factors that drive users to the beach. And again, we're citing extreme heat events. And we'll talk about the pollution part of Cal Enviro Screen 4.0, because in the Southern California context, unlike the Marin context, pollution burdens are significant and also may have a push factor to beach use. And then we've struggled with, and we think we've cracked open this question of demographic and socioeconomic profiling, because as you know, as we'll discuss, the census data has certain limitations, and we've had to do some data processing to get at the topics that Leah was talking about. Next slide, please. So let me suggest that within the collaborative that we are working with, we have some of the best scientists, including those that you've heard already today. And one of them is Dr. Merrill, who works in the Office of Research and Development, EPA, and he'll describe his early work that we've benefited from and then taken off from. So Nate, I think you're up, and take it away.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everybody on the line today. I'm Nate. I work at the US EPA's Office of Research and Development, and I'm from, the office is in Narragansett, Rhode Island, so I'm an East Coaster. That picture is showing all the people that came to Rhode Island's coastal access points in 2017. And you see the little bright spot, that's our state and where we're from. So you see more people from closer come. And so we were a working group of social scientists at EPA's research office looking to understand the impacts of water quality on people. And one of the missing pieces of benefit categories was coastal recreation and beach recreation. And so pretty early on, we were testing methods on how do we get visitation in accounts, how do we get origin information, how do we get economic information to complement our traditional methods. And we sort of got working on the cell phone data when our traditional surveys got caught up in bureaucratic processes back in 2016. And we were looking for other ways to do what we typically want to do. So we tested the use of cell phone data to analyze beach use in the Northeast, focusing on Narragansett Bay National Estuary Program. That's an EPA geographic program, and as well as Cape Cod, Massachusetts, who are dealing with a bunch of nutrient and estuary pollution problems, where this sort of analysis would help them better understand the return on investment from their wastewater infrastructure. And we've since expanded this work to this California work. Mark and their team saw a story map that a colleague of mine made for the Bay program, or Narragansett Bay Estuary program, that got his attention and called me, and I was excited to jump in to work in California. One, because they do traditional methods on the ground through their BSA program, which you'll hear about later, which provides some of those nice ways to compare different methods. And also because they have a lot of water quality problems. So in the big sense, it fits into our mission in understanding if we can apply our methods in places that are relevant to understand environmental problems and beneficiaries. Next slide, Mario. Okay, so stepping back a little bit, what type of cell phone data am I talking about, and how do we interact with it? So the data sets we've been using ultimately come from the device locations of smartphones with applications that are running, recording the position and kicking that position back or selling that position to data aggregators who are then packaging it up and selling it to us end users. So essentially it's a sample of beach users, those with cell phones and those with cell phones that are sharing the location and in areas of interest to us. So we've sampled this data using space. Those are in the shaded region of that picture are the points of interest. These are some beaches on Cape Cod. And in return, we get not individual device locations, the way we're interacting with it, but aggregated totals. So sums of number of devices and number of people by hour, day, month, and the origin of those devices at a monthly resolution or a daily resolution at the census block group geographical scale. And these points of interest are, drawn by us. So you're sort of sampling space and asking for grouped information back. And we've been working with AirSage as a provider. Next slide. The first thing we did was, how does it match official series and on the ground counts that we could take? Sort of the don't trust and verify approach. And for us, this is what we were interested in. Like, how would we use it either to predict what we would normally take or to augment what we do? And so here are the results. And so anybody that can read a scatter plot here, this is Cape Cod, each dot, Cape Cod beaches and one in Narragansett, Rhode Island. Each dot is a day of counts, on-site counts of people, gate counts, or at least a sampling plan that was trying to proxy gate counts, and then the cell data counts. So these two data series are related. There's obviously predictive power in using cell data counts to reproduce on-site counts, but they're not in the same scale. They're not on that one-to-one line that I drew there. And so this sort of led to a number of papers of like, how do we use this in a model and then predict visitation for different uses? As part of this, we did a lot of our own counts. So we realized really quickly, as others have spoken about, the official series are lacking and are sort of either inconsistent in time, inconsistent in space, or not documented, or tough to combine with each other because there are different theoretical concepts of visits. And so we spent a lot of work kind of getting the official counts into the same scale that we want to use, and then taking our own counts. And we chose the lower end, like the places with fewer people, because we thought that's where the cell data would struggle the most. And we sort of did our own on the ground samples. If you look at the paper behind this, you'll see that it performs relatively well in each of those sort of size beaches, a little bit better at places with more people. Next slide. This work is all published in open access journals. And we did some follow-on work looking at lost trips due to bacterial closures at beaches, so swimming closures, showing the impact of bad water quality on people. Next slide. And sort of the newest stuff and newest off the press is work using cell phone locational data sets and the National Park Service's Visitor Use Monitoring Program, which is essentially our largest visitor use monitoring program spread all the way across the country at all these different park units. And we took a sample of what turned out to be 38 units, accounting for about 43% of the visitation. And we compared the two ways to estimate monthly visitation at these places and found the cell phone data correlating quite well in many places where there were few entrances to the parks. And those parks were the large iconic ones, Yosemite, Glacier, those sort of ones, and less the cell data performed less well in places that had more intersections and so road networks into the park, and those that were more in urban environments. Next slide. So it's a bit way of saying we've done some more validation on the visitation dimension of the cell data and less on the origin dimension of cell data. That work is coming along. There's some evidence from some park examples. And one of the things I was excited with this California group to get involved with is that they do intercept surveys through their BSA program that would be excellent for comparing methods. But the cell data is a sample of people. It's not all of them, just like many of our other methods. So samples come with all the issues that you can think of in stats. The bias, depending on what gets in there, is an example. Like how well does the sample of people in these panels represent, say, demographics as the beach as you would normally take them? I think that evidence is still coming along and definitely coming along in a beach application. So I'd say ongoing science. it doesn't match traditional methods right out of the box. So, I showed you an example from Cape Cod. We found similar things in the Park Service data. The scale relationships are different for reasons both probably on the cell data application side, what space you sample, how you define a trip in terms of duration of stay, and certainly on the observational side, how their observational series may miss entrances or overcount or undercount in different examples. So it won't ever replace traditional observational studies. I think these two things are going to have to go together. One big reason is the device location samples, vendors, and commercial products are changing. And as they change, each one of those through time need to be validated against things on the ground that we trust or that we want to benchmark against. This might mean taking more things on the ground that we trust and tweaking the way we do it to get better validation series. Figuring out what area to sample is hard. So what spatial zone counts as the beach? In a lot of cases, you have built infrastructure or other amenities that aren't quite maybe the beach nearby, and whether you include those or not include those has implications to the level of visitation or that you're going to get back. Next slide. I'll turn it back over to Mark to explain a little bit about the BSA and their application in Southern California.
Thanks, Nate. So bringing this back to our work in Southern California, one of the reasons, as Nate mentioned this, one of the reasons that we were potentially interested in the validity of cell phone data and its applicability is that Dr. Patch and colleagues at Cal State Channel Islands have, for almost a decade now, collected information on a variety of topics with regard to a series of beach sites stretching from Los Angeles all the way to Santa Barbara County. And this slide just shows you the summative analysis of environmental, physical, and socioeconomic topics in order to create a grade for our various beaches, kind of a combination of threats and conditions that can be multispectral and really give some attention to the socioeconomic topics that we've, in some cases, have neglected. So using this platform, we were attempting to use cell phone in some of the same beach locations and then take advantage of some of the beach counts that has historically been taken as part of the BSA to do some of the validation calibration. And we're in that step now, understanding how these things fit together or don't fit together. And one of the lessons we've learned, and one of the things that we'll talk about as we finish this presentation, is we've learned that the cell phone data or the big data has a utility, but it has to be connected to these other on the ground, either intercept surveys and or beach counts. And we are undertaking those within our landscape in order to really validate the use of the cell phone data. Next slide, please. So we picked 50 points of interest stretching from Santa Monica, as I say, all the way to western Santa Barbara County, in order to understand a range of typologies of beaches. And Nate mentioned this, some of our beaches are, to use a term, very porous. Some of the beaches are very constrained, and there's one entrance and you pay a fee and you have to go on them. But we need to understand how these different beaches actually receive and host beach use. So we developed these pilot project beach sites that would address our management partners like MRCA and LA County Beaches and Harbors, and then within the beacon landscape, the management agencies that manage about 55 or 60 beaches. We didn't do a comprehensive survey. We did a select survey because, as you know, there are literally in Southern California, there are hundreds of beach access points. We actually focused some attention on Malibu. As you all know, Malibu is a lightning rod for coastal access. And so we wanted to understand kind of what are the demographics, and we'll describe the limitations in developing the demographics relative to the origin question of where these beach users come from. Next slide, please. So we did a similar but a different kind of analysis than Point Blue did, or we're just visualizing it a different way. We came up with beach user market areas as a term of art. And we tried to identify primary and secondary beach user areas. So we wanted to have a gross understanding of the numbers of beach users in these select locations. And one of the things we did for the beacon beaches is we just combined and summed them all together, the select pilot project beaches that are. And you can see that there are these primary counties and beach use areas. And we'll further describe the disaggregation into block groups and disadvantaged communities. But first, we just want to establish how wide and extensive is beach use. And similar to the Stinson Beach example, people are coming to the beaches from all over the United States, all over the counties of California. But in many cases, these beaches serve very robust local populations. And one of the things that we found is that even though the beacon management agencies are in a separate geography, we share market. You can see that we get heavy use, not just from local beaches, but local users, but we get heavy use from Los Angeles, and then it extends to Orange, Kern, and San Diego County. So we have big market areas for beach use in Southern California. Next slide, please. One of the things that we have touched on, but we should talk about, is that over the course of time, when the vendors offer this information to us, it's limited in many ways by their understanding of race, ethnicity, and demographics. And so, interestingly enough, when we bought our first set of data from AirSage, we didn't even have the 2020 census finished and or available to us. And as you know, as the census has emerged and changed over time, the issue of representation is a big one. And in the 2020 census, it's a self-identified checkbox. But we wanted to identify the Hispanic community as a separate ethnic category so we could really understand who in Southern California goes to the beach. So there was some processing involved in this. And one lesson I want to just emphasize to everybody is there's no data you get from a vendor that you take and you use in any way or analysis. There's a lot of processing in this because, as you can imagine, between census 2010 and 2020, there are census block groups that have to be reorganized and identified and then be able to be compared. But one of the big issues we found was the census as a data set needs to be disaggregated so we can understand better race and ethnicity in the use of beaches. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we've tried to understand for ourselves is how are beach users defined, and then how can we fairly attribute categories of use to real representation? And here I'm going to get into a little bit of the weeds, because as we said, when you check the box for the census, if you check Hispanic, for example, or if you check Central American, you have to go through the white category. And as you know, within the census categories, that the white category is a very broad category, and it's being reviewed for purposes of adequate representation of the demographics and ethnicities of beach users. And this took some time for us to do this as a team. But what you'll see is that beaches have extensive use of non-white populations. And this is in the Beacon. When we get to the Los Angeles, you'll see this in greater relief. But this took some time for us to sort out and figure out. So first we have the gross numbers of how many people are coming to the beach, and then we try to find out who are those people and fairly who do they represent by race and ethnicity. So, next slide, please. And then, as Sam mentioned, we too had to go and sort through the various screens for disadvantagedness. We all want to understand our underserved, under-resourced communities. And this tool in the state of the art in California is Cal Enviro Screen 4.0. Different from the Stinson Beach example, however, we didn't choose a subset of the 20 EnviroScreen categories. We took all 20, but we compared EnviroScreen to other screening tools like the Justice 40 and the Social Vulnerability Index, and then non-governmental screening tools. But for our purposes, we found within California that the EnviroScreen 4.0 was a good tool to use, even given the limitations that have been described previously. I would note now with regard to federal funding, that for federal funding, there's a tool now that derived from Justice 40. That's a federal effort to do the same thing. And so we may be forced as a user community to actually have more than one screen, because now federal funds coming out of IRA and BIL have to conform with the disadvantaged census blocks of Justice 40. There's great overlap, but there are slight differences. Next slide, please. And as Sam noted, we've mapped the top most disadvantaged census tracts in our region in order then to lay over beach use analysis to understand how many of these people and where they're coming from. Next slide, please. So there's the disaggregated census tract analysis for our Los Angeles County community. Next slide, please. So we've talked about this, and I think this is kind of the heart of understanding how we may utilize these data, but then how much work it'll be to utilize them effectively and transparently to get at what we all want to get at. So we've already had the issue of data accuracy. Self-reporting demographic information in the census has an error bar. The census data itself had to be cleaned and processed. We had to understand this question of census tracts, census block groups, and then understand how to update the census from one decadal to the next decade, and then understanding our race, ethnicity, and demographics. So these are all things that took a lot of intellectual work among the whole team. And we benefited by the work of Point Blue in actually understanding these questions and the limitations. What are the sideboards on these questions? Because there are significant, a range of error that we have to talk about, and then we have to kind of size if we can. Next slide, please. So the only reason we're doing this work, or the many reasons we're doing this work, is to better figure out who's going to the beach and who isn't going to the beach. And then these push and pull factors around beach accessibility, transportation, cost, facilities, welcomeness, all these conditions together affect beach use. And so what we've done is some examples. And so we want to give you an example in Malibu. And today we have a planner at MRCA, Mario Sandoval, who will present this information. Take it away, Mario.
Thank you, Mark, and good morning. Hello, everyone. My name is Mario Sandoval. I am a coastal planner with the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority. And as Mark and Nate perfectly teed up, we will be going into a specific case study in the city of Malibu, known as Lechuza Beach. Lechuza Beach is obviously in the coastal zone and within the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. This is the largest urban parkland unit in the world. Lechuza Beach is an ideal case study because it is, as many call, a hidden beach. It's a small 6.5-acre pocket beach in western Malibu, very close to the Ventura County line. Our preliminary findings challenge many of the long-held assumptions about Malibu and the public that recreates at these beaches. Here is our point of interest for Lechuza Beach. It captures a portion of the sandy beach that's publicly owned and the free parking on Broad Beach Road. This is the nearest public road as our data set for public usership at Lechuza Beach. Lechuza Beach visitation over the past 6 years is about 1.9 million visitors. Keep in mind that the data sets only capture those visitors with a cell phone that stay for a minimum of 15 minutes or more within that point of interest. It also does not capture residents or workers' cell phones that commonly ping or regularly ping in the surrounding residential area or within the POI. Unsurprisingly, the data shows that the majority of Lechuza Beach visitors are from Los Angeles County and nearby Ventura County as well. As we suspected, however, the total beach user market area, or BUMA, also includes substantial visitorship from the neighboring counties as well. Some 76,000 visitors came from these neighboring counties, with about 33,000 of those visitors from non-coastal inland counties of San Bernardino and Riverside. Here we combine disaggregated census information with the cell phone origin location information, so we can estimate the demographics of beach users, as were described before as profiles, including a racial and ethnic populations, and most importantly, breaking out the Hispanic, Latino, Latinx populations out of other demographic selectors within the census data. This was no small task, and we engaged experienced personnel to process the cell phone data files and combine the census information focused on demographics to create the exhibit shown here, showing the breakdown of Lechuza Beach visitors from 2017 to 2022. And what we found is that Lechuza Beach visitors reflect the demographics of the larger LA metro area once we did that demographic breakout. As we zoom in at a larger scale, we can see that roughly 18% of the total California visitors over the 6 years originated from census tracts that fall within that top 30% of the most disadvantaged in the state. You can see those census tracts here highlighted in yellow. Over 375 visitors came to Lechuza Beach from some of the most vulnerable communities, despite the distance and lack of economic resources, and despite the lack of amenities like a restroom at this very popular pocket beach in Malibu. This slide summarizes Lechuza Beach visitation statistics for the recent 6 years of data that has been purchased and collected. Most interestingly, this table does show how visitation fluctuates over the 6-year period. And what we found the most interesting as was provided by the team previous to us, the spike in visitorship during the COVID lockdown in the summer of 2020, as many of beach users in Southern California and across the state witnessed in 2020, people were flocking to the beaches and public outdoor spaces after only being cooped up for a few months. With most other recreational or leisure activities unavailable, access to these passive recreational spaces became invaluable, and this data begins to quantify what we were seeing on the ground for ourselves. As land managers, we are constantly rethinking how to best serve the public that are recreating along the coast, but we also ask ourselves, how can land managers do this without relying on quantifiable data that measures passive recreation? We now know who comes to Lechuza Beach and that they are traveling great distances. We know they typically stay 1 to 2 hours and recognize that these visitors have no restroom facilities at the beach at this time. The big data combined with user intercept surveys, existing and future surveys, may demonstrate that people are curtailing their visit because there is no public restroom at this beach, as we've seen from other restrooms in the pilot project or other beaches in the pilot project that do have and offer public restrooms. This better data can also support more equitable access to the coast and the sandy beaches, as they are geographically fixed and unique resources. We commonly say that we can't recreate the beach in inland communities and urban centers, so we must prioritize bringing people to the coast where this public investment has historically and disproportionately benefited the least vulnerable communities. And so this data could be used to show that the public travels to where this public investment is concentrated, like in Malibu's 21-mile coast, which is often used, as we see from the data, as a respite for desert and historically excluded inland communities. And as we're looking more into the data, seeing how that correlates with extreme heat events as well. We see high usership and demand at Lechuza Beach, but the public investment for facilities is still lagging behind, as we noted. We do appreciate the partnership with the Coastal Conservancy to fund public access improvements for this beach later this year, such as this public restroom and the ADA improvements at Lechuza Beach in Malibu. I'm just going to kick that back over to Mark. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Mario. And I wanted to make a couple comments just about where we're going with our work, and then emphasize a couple of conclusions that have already been made. One of them is that although we didn't spend a lot of time today in our short presentation, we have studied the effect of COVID on beach use. And much like the experience in Stinson Beach, we found extensive increases in beach use. So we did mark a COVID effect. But what we also found is the same thing Sam found or described, and that is a post-COVID effect. People went back to their daily lives well before the COVID emergencies were formally declared over. And so the peaks were pronounced in 20 and sometimes in 21. But by the end of 21, 22, beach use has returned in many locations to its historic numbers. And so we do, as a preliminary conclusion, have this notion that beach use is dramatically affected by events. We are in the preliminary stages of doing initial analysis of the correlations between heat waves, beach visitation, water quality warnings, and a host of other conditions that affect beach access, including the cost and expense of transportation. We're continuing to refine with the scientists the demographic and census data, and our focus down in these underserved and under-resourced communities. We're following up our pilot project with another stage now, focusing on some of the same beaches in Santa Monica Bay and trying to get a good sense of documenting the beach patterns. But we're also going to undertake additional beach counts and beach intercept surveys this summer to really validate and understand better through both quantitative surveying and qualitative survey questions beach use. We believe that as a group that we can offer a lot of additional fodder for understanding that, whereas it isn't the case that everybody in Southern California goes to the beach, it is the case that millions and very diverse, and in many cases, you saw with Lechuza, in a high percentage, even disadvantaged community members are able to avail themselves of these coastal resources. But as you know, and as many of you are practicing in this field, the issue of access and transportation, the issue of the conditions in the facilities, Mario examined those for Lechuza Beach, are really important considerations. And we need more in number and more robust qualitative and quantitative interaction with the beach user community to better understand what kind of programs we should be developing going forward. With that, I'm just going to conclude and say that we're happy to answer any questions you all may have. And we want to thank the Conservancy and the network for the opportunity to present this early and evolving information. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Jessica.
Great. Thank you so much for that presentation. It looks like we have a few questions in the Q&A, so I will address those now. It looks like Christine Walker was asking for a link to the story map you mentioned early on in your presentation. So if you have a link to that, please. Oh, great. I just saw you put it in the chat. That's perfect. I will also include that in the follow-up email if folks want to click through it there. Another question from Destiny Preston is, were beaches in San Diego County evaluated?
Beaches in San Diego County were not evaluated as part of the pilot project, but we understand that State Parks has a separate and complementary effort to do at least state beaches along the San Diego County coastline.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mark. Okay, one other question. And folks, if you have any other questions, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom panel. So our next question is, can you remind us if the Southern California user data findings are published or plan to be released?
They are not published, but we plan to release them. So that's forthcoming.
Okay, well, we'll keep our eyes peeled for that. Um, okay, while we wait for any other questions, I have one of my own. I thought the case study example of Lechuza Beach was really awesome to hear about. Just the fact that folks are visiting from far away, despite the traveling distance and the lack of facilities at that small beach. And I appreciated that Mario, you spoke about how public investment has historically benefited the least vulnerable areas and communities. And this data just shows how public investment can shift to enhance the beach amenities at sites where disadvantaged or inland communities are traveling to actually use the coast. So I was just wondering if there's any other beach sites that have surfaced in your research as key sites to redirect public investment towards, or if you could speak on that a bit more.
Yeah, I can quickly touch on that, and then I'll kick it over to Mark for another example that we've seen in Los Angeles County. We evaluated, I believe, about 16 beaches in the city of Malibu itself, some that were MRCA managed beaches or beaches that have, access easements directly to them that are exclusively managed by the MRCA. But we also looked at, beaches that are managed by LA County Beaches and Harbors, state parks, throughout Malibu as well. And we saw that, we're seeing similar numbers. We're seeing similar demographic breakdowns. We're seeing that people are traveling large distances to come to Malibu's 21-mile coast. As we always note, these are, LA's beaches. There's obviously been a disproportionate amount of investment when it comes to providing, public serving, recreational amenities, parking, and enhancing those portions that really benefit people that are traveling great distances that don't have the benefit of having, a restroom down the street. And so we want to emphasize that, that kind of investment has lagged behind the actual management of these public spaces. But I think some of the data is really showing interest in other Los Angeles County beaches. I think Mark would like to speak to that a little bit more.
Sorry, unmute. I want to mention a couple of this is a pilot project, so we kind of selected different beaches, but we wanted to understand some of the conditions within LA County. So if you all know Los Angeles, you know where LAX is, and immediately west of LAX is a beach called Dockweiler. So it's operated by County Beaches and Harbors. It actually has a series of different facilities and activities there. But we were very interested in Dockweiler because if you actually go directly east from Dockweiler, you get to South LA. And Dockweiler turns out to be, in our little pilot project, although we didn't talk about it today, the most diverse beach that we've surveyed to date. And we do believe that in some cases, and this is to be, panned out in the research, that there are these locations that have historically been areas for certain user groups in Los Angeles to go to. And Dockweiler has become one of those. It's an assembly spot, an assembly spot for very diverse use in LA. I will say this about what we've learned about Los Angeles with regard to the history of beach use in Los Angeles. We are adding interpretive and educational materials at certain beach sites to recognize the fact that those beach sites were not available historically to diverse populations. And those beach sites still remain incredibly important to these communities, but there have been significant barriers to their use of these beach resources. And I think through some of our qualitative partnership, through some of our qualitative surveys that are going to be done by some of our community partners, that we'll be able to have a better record of this beach use historically, and then what kind of connection does it have to beach use going forward? Because there are beaches that are favored by individuals and by communities. And I think we're starting to unpack that a little bit. I will say this about facilities. I think Mario and MRCA and LA County have begun to understand how the facilities question has to be reframed so that we can broaden it to what kind of facilities are appropriate at the beach and needed and desired by the communities at the beach. And I think that's just an evolving topic as well.
Great. Thank you so much for telling us about those. We have a follow-up question about Dockweiler Beach. So for the Dockweiler case study, I wonder if there's a difference in beach visitation before or after a lot of the free parking was removed by the city, which they thought was maybe in 2019. So I don't know if you want to maybe answer that or give some thoughts about parking as a critical amenity.
Well, Mario illustrated in his slide the on-street parking, because many facilities don't have parking lots, and where they have parking lots, there's steep parking charges. And we have found that use over time, his parking restrictions over time have in some cases been increased, and we've lost parking resources that are on-street workers that are an essential component of beach access. In the Dockweiler case, I think it's Highland or Sea Vista, which is the street above Dockweiler, which historically you could park on both sides of the street. And now there is no parking. So you're forced to go into the lot and pay the fee. We haven't really analyzed that yet. And yet we do want to analyze the elasticity question of parking charges and how that is a burden to beach access use. Because in the Malibu case study, and in many cases in our small cities, Manhattan, Hermosa, on-street parking is the resource. Yes, there's some parking at the pier or whatever, but it's very modest. And so this is a very big issue. And so when we draw these points of interest, those are the destination locations. In our pilot study, we had to understand the on-street parking resource and then map it so we could see if that's how it's used. And that's evolving. We're learning about that, and we'll be reporting that out, because the question of parking for access has just become a lightning rod in a lot of communities. And we are, in our little work in Beacon in our counties, we've been strong proponents for these retaining these parking resources at these particular locations where we know, I'm just going to say it, lower income beach users come to. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I'm sure we haven't spoke about this quite yet, but with sea level rise and the impact that's going to have on our coastlines, that's another sort of layer to add on to this parking question and this issue of space and the amenities and facilities that we can provide in California.
Jessica, I was wondering if I could add a little bit to what Mark was alluding to as far as the parking. I mean, what we've seen is, as he noted, parking that's available or parking that's limited is kind of a very valuable resource, especially when it comes to people who are traveling great distances just to get to these beaches. And so more and more we're seeing, local jurisdictions and municipalities, the city of Malibu is not alone in this, in, labeling Pacific Coast Highway as, a dangerous highway and aiming to eliminate public parking along many stretches of PCH that are directly adjacent to these beaches that we see, like high usership. And so just, cautioning people to see that, when you hear arguments for public safety, conflating the public use and availability of public parking, to take that with a grain of salt and just to understand, there might be other motivations behind, the elimination of parking in the name of public safety, when really public parking is such a valuable resource, especially for vulnerable communities that do visit these exclusive spaces. So I just wanted to make that note.
Great, thank you, Mario. Okay, we have one more question in the Q&A box, and then I think I'll open up the floor to all of our presenters. But our last one is, are the census tracts uniform enough in terms of ethnicity to assign that ethnicity to the whole tract? Or do you assign a proportional value of ethnicity to users from that tract?
The latter. So if the tract has 40% Latino, Latinx, Hispanic, we, for convenience, just take that and assume that that's the proportion for the entire tract. And as Nate mentioned, you aren't the tract. You, the person, are not the census tract. And It's a panel. And so we just have to be careful with how we describe it so people understand what the limitations and what the descriptors are and how accurate they are. So if we did an analysis of all our tracks, and we came up with these proportional statistics, and then we used them to put into our larger summary of ethnicity.
Yeah, can I add to that? So that's
Okay.
okay. Sure. So Mark is right. We have the limitations and error, if you may, in the data. But if you are comparing, for example, 1 year to the next, one region to another, maybe, but 1 year to the next in particular, for example, one season to another, one day to another, then that error can kind of cancels out, right? Because this is, you're comparing these percentages of people, you know, that are from the same block group. So it was never an intent to actually put exact numbers of people. What we want is to do these comparisons that illustrate something about how people are using the beaches.
Great, thanks for that, Leo. We have one more question, and I will also invite anyone who would like to ask questions of our first presenters, Leo and Sam. Please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box. We have about 8 minutes left, so yeah, open it up to any questions. But our next one is, who are the partners that will be taking care of the qualitative surveys at Dockweiler Beach?
So we're working with the Bay Foundation in Los Angeles on this, and then we'll be working with Cal State University Channel Islands. So we'll be training enumerators, and we hope some will come from university students and some will come from nonprofit recruitment. But I can't say exactly. I'm just working with the Bay Foundation to structure that for the summer beach count.
Awesome.
Is there a partner volunteer in that? I don't know who asked that question, but happy to follow up with them.
Yeah, if it's all right with you, maybe I can share some of your contact information in the follow-up email, and if folks want to get involved. I see your emails also on this slide, so please feel free to reach out to our presenters. Yeah, and we have about 6 minutes, so if anyone has further questions, please put them in the Q&A box. I'll also invite any of our presenters if there's something else you wanted to discuss or chat about. The floor is all yours.
And Mike mentioned, Jessica, the issue of privacy. It was emphasized, but I want to assure everyone that there's no individual identifiers associated with any of this mass data. It's been scrubbed, it's been washed, it's been cleaned, and those are funny terms, but you couldn't ever identify a person and their behavior from this data that we're purchasing. The second thing about the data availability is these people are really fantastic data scientists, but they're also commercial vendors, and they're going to sell you a product that they didn't build for you. What we found is that this transportation information is really built around the transportation infrastructure in the United States. And to break it into coastal access and beach use is a challenge for the vendors. We've had a lot of conversations with the vendors about this. And we're going to go back out and we're going to resurvey them for what they can bring to the table. But this is a very highly interactive relationship with the vendor and with the data. And it's not just an off-the-shelf thing. I think I really emphasize there's nothing off the shelf that you can easily use that you haven't really broken down and then rebuilt back up into your system.
Yeah, I think one of the really striking things from both presentations, all of you, is just the breadth of information that you can get from cell phone data, and seeing that folks are visiting beaches from all over the state or all over the country is really striking. And I think it's going to be really valuable to see how the demographic information can really inform decisions going forward. And yeah, this is a really evolving and interesting topic. So appreciate your work on this and for sharing your work today. Give it one more minute if anyone has questions. Oh, and I see there's some discussion in the chat, and want to flag that Destiny just posted that this topic of coastal access and safety is going to be discussed at the California Transportation Commission meeting this week. So check out the chat for information on that. If there's no further questions, we can wrap up today. Give it one more minute in case there's one last question we have time for. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining today's webinar, and thanks to our presenters. You'll receive a follow-up email with a link to this recording and a copy of the slides. So a big thank you again to our presenters, and take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Jessica.
Pleasure.
Thank you.